Hi, my name is Nick DeFrank, and this is my Pecha Kucha that will be outlining 20 terms that we've used in our course throughout the semester. And to start off, we have a zone of proximal development, which is an area of potential development where the learner can achieve that potential only through assistance of others. And an example of that would be a child learning an L2 with the assistance of a teacher to reach the next level of potential they wouldn't have otherwise been able to reach. And the second term I have is second language acquisition, or SLA, which is the study of individuals or groups who are learning a language subsequent to learning their first as a child. Whenever I think of studying, I always think of hitting the books, so I figured a stack of dictionaries featuring different languages was a pretty good illustration of this idea. And next I have informal L2 learning, which is learning language in a natural context. And we see here that it's a German coffee hour that's organized for every Wednesday, where people are encouraged to speak German freely so they can learn from other Germans and other learners of German themselves. And next we have formal L2 learning, which is learning a language in a classroom setting. Which is basically just any language class you could think to take, Spanish 1010, literature classes in other languages, just anything in a formal teacher-student setting. And next up we have bilingualism, which is the ability to use two languages, and also multilingualism, which is just the same thing but more than two languages. And here I have a picture of the exchange trip I went on, featuring a bunch of different people from different countries, most of which could speak 2 or 3 languages, respectively. And up next we have simultaneous multilingualism, which is a simultaneous L1 acquisition, or 2 L1s, before 3 years of age. And this is illustrated by my nephew, who is currently learning Spanish and English simultaneously. And next up we have the stimulus response theory, which says children learn language through imitation, and I've illustrated this by the movie WALL-E, where the WALL-E the robot on the left is trying to learn Eve's name on the right, and continues to mess it up even though she repeats it to him. And next up we have innate capacity, which is language structure is genetically given from parent to child. And this is very close to singing, or what people perceive singing is like, that it's genetically passed on, it's not something you can learn. And next up we have the critical period hypothesis, which is an idea that flawless language acquisition can only take place before a certain age is reached. And I've illustrated this with Bruce Willis in Die Hard and his cheesy action line, "I'm getting too old for this." Very close to language acquisition idea. And next up we have universal grammar, which is a set of principles which are properties of all languages in the world. And to illustrate this idea, I thought of the universal translators from Star Trek that can take any language based on the same components and translate them into another language seamlessly. And after that we have fossilization, which is the stop of interlingual development before L2 language norms are reached. And I've illustrated this with Peter Sellers' character in The Pink Panther, who maintains a strong French accent in his English despite having learned English for a really long time. And interlanguage is the next one. It's the in-between states that are experienced when learning an L2. And the famous example of this is when JFK said, "Ich bin ein Berliner," and when he went to Berlin in the 60s, and he accidentally said he was a pastry. And next up we have connectionism, which is an approach to SLA that views it as the associations of stimuli and responses as opposed to rules and structures. I've used African music, the djembe drum, to illustrate this because African music is known for using call and response techniques in performance of it. Next up we have parallel distribution processing, which I've illustrated with Siri here. And this is a theory of SLA that says frequency of input and feedback are the strongest indicators for learning a language, and which Siri is very closely connected to, being that she is purely based on input and feedback from the speaker. And next up we have motivation, and I've used Ash from the cartoon Pokemon to describe this, where he has a lot of motivation to become the best Pokemon trainer, and his progress reflects that, much like in second language acquisition, one's motivation can strongly reflect how they learn a language and how fast they make progress. Next up is learning strategies, which are behaviors and/or techniques taken on in an effort to acquire an L2. And to illustrate this, I've got some French flashcards, being that memorization is a technique in order to make progress in an L2. And next up we have additive bilingualism, which is when an L1 and L2 experience equal advancement and progress within a learner. To illustrate this is a picture of me in German club, where I have the opportunity to learn German while I equally make progress in English in my other classes, namely education classes. And next up we have functionalism, which is an approach to SLA that considers language more as a means of communication. And I've illustrated this with me attempting to talk to a German, probably unsuccessfully. And this really illustrates that imitation and repetition is, according to this theory, is the best way to learn language. And next up we have morphology, and I've illustrated this with Friday the 13th, pieces of words that carry meaning, morphemes, such as suffixes, prefixes, and inflections for numbers and tense. And I've illustrated this with the 13th, the TH being an indicator that it comes in a series, which is a morpheme. And next up I have phonology, which is speech sounds or phonemes, sequences of consonants and vowels, intonation and tone, and pauses and stops. And I've used a German poem by Goethe to illustrate this, being that poetry really likes to play around with phonology in order to be pleasing to the ear and give more meaning. I'd like to thank you for watching my Pecha Kucha today, and I really look forward to looking at everybody else's and seeing what sort of ideas and connections they made.